And welcome back, continuing part 2 for this week, Chapter 9. So we talked about real-time operating systems, RTOS, as embedded OSs. And then there's RTEMS, real-time executive for multiprocessor systems. This is an open source embedded OS used in space systems. And it supports processors designed to operate in space. Again, using multiple embedded OSs actually increases your attack surface, so we would want to be careful. If you want to play around with an RTOS, you can get a free copy of it from SourceForge. I just throw that out there. Now, yet implementing security measures in embedded OSs is connected with numerous challenges. And I list some of the challenges here: power, memory, development expertise, network connectivity, and physical exposure. Feel free to review those. Pause the tape and review those. So the potential for exploit. We ask ourselves, what are the consequences of embedded systems exploits? The most common examples of exploits are hacks of consumer electronics, such as GPS devices, video cards, Wi-Fi routers, and gaming devices. I even saw once on the news somebody hacked a camera in a child's room, right, that didn't have multi-factor authentication. So these hacks are usually possible because manufacturers don't protect the firmware. As a result, almost anyone with a little technical knowledge can gain access to these premium features, right? Embedded OSs, again, have vulnerabilities. You can go to a website such as exploit-db.com, or another one is packetstormsecurity.org, and they have info on what attackers are doing with these vulnerabilities. As I mentioned, the easiest way to profit from hacking is to attack devices where cache is stored. I mentioned ATM machines previously. The most common ATM attacks involved are using credit card skimmers. Those are the same skimmers I've mentioned in previous lectures that you might find at a gas station, right? I always, before I put in my card, shake the connection where my card goes in. If it's loose, it's likely a skimmer. 2009, Diebold announced that hackers had installed malware on more than a dozen ATMs running Windows XP embedded. But that took an insider. An insider that was an authorized technician installed the malicious code and allowed complete control of the ATM, including unlimited cash dispensing. Right? Again, tying physical security, an insider threat, which is a common one, to cybersecurity. Now, there are many types of attacks: software, network, and side-based attacks. So 12 are listed here. Machines of any size and complexity may become vulnerable because of unsecure embedded systems, right? So, for example, the firmware of crew information system, an onboard networking system of the Boeing 787 we found was vulnerable to buffer overflow, memory corruption, stack overflow, and denial of service attacks. In case of a successful attack, a hacker could obtain personal information on the pilots or compromise the avionics network on the plane. Military equipment can also suffer from embedded attacks. For example, hackers could shut down the trusted aircraft information download station of the F-15 fighter jet if we're not careful. And this embedded device is what collects data from the video cameras and sensors during flight, giving pilots navigation data, right, in real time. So embedded systems have a great foundation, even in implanted medical devices. These devices have to be small and long-lasting and operate in real time, but they're also susceptible to hacking. as was discovered by a group of ethical hackers who researched devices produced by a medical device company called Medtronic, famous, large medical device company. The vulnerabilities they discovered in the Medtronic insulin pumps and pacemakers could interrupt or stop the devices or let a hacker control them. Again, you can find more on that at www.apriorit.com. Very interesting website. And so continue with the types of attacks. I mentioned software, network, and side-based. So software attacks are attacks that target the brains of the system, right? The application that manages the devices. So a successful attack on software allows a hacker to access data or gain control over the embedded system. So searching for vulnerabilities in software design and code is the most popular vector of attack because it's possible to conduct such an attack even remotely, right? And so also a software-based attack doesn't require a specific knowledge from the hackers. They can use typical attacks like those that we're collecting in our RIST register, like deploying malware and brute force. The most widespread software attacks, again, are malware, brute force, overflowing the buffer memory, and exploiting the web service. Now, malware attacks on embedded systems work the same way as with any other system. A hacker deploys a piece of malicious code and tries to intercept the data stored inside the system, take control over the system perhaps, or harm it. Usually, hackers fake firmware updates is one way they might do it. They might fake driver updates or security patches to deliver the malware. So to prevent such attacks, we want to implement various security measures like blacklisting, which developer can create a signature for a new piece of software, right? Or whitelist protection creates a specific signature that all trusted sources must have, right? This allows the system to run only a whitelist, only the software with the proper signature, right? Honeypots might be used also, etc. Okay, network attacks exploit the network infrastructure and can also be performed remotely. Using these vulnerabilities, hackers listen for and intercept and modify traffic transmitted by an embedded system, right? So the most common types of these attacks, again, are typical man-in-the-middle, DNS poisoning between the DNS and the fully qualified domain name, distributed denial of service, session hijacking so that you can get inside of a current session, and signal jamming. And you can look those up yourself. I will say man-in-the-middle attack is used to intercept or alter the data transmitted by an embedded system. So to execute that, hackers change the connection parameters of the two devices, typical man-in-the-middle, in order to replace a third one between them. So they're putting themselves in the middle. If hackers can obtain or alter the cryptographic keys used by both devices, they can easily eavesdrop, which is separate from man-in-the-middle. Eavesdrop is just listening and collecting, but it can be very hard to detect, right? And so that's that. And then there's also side-based attacks. Side channel attacks intend to use the hardware security flaws in these embedded systems and hack them. This is really hard to do. It's the most expensive type of attack. So, but just to make you aware of it. Now, Linux, Unix, etc. The NIX family has embedded OSs too, and can be hacked. There's a real-time Linux, or RT Linux, is their real-time embedded software. Linux DDWRT is another one that can be exposed. So as a security tester, you need to remember that sometimes the biggest security threat to an organization is its employees. Following the least privilege principle can help reduce the insider threat, as I mentioned in the ATM attack. Or another one besides the least privilege principle is the two-person concept, right? It takes two people. Had that ATM technician required two people, that would have been harder to do as an insider threat job. So you may read some articles on ATMs to get more background on that. So embedded systems are everywhere, as we've shown now. On the eve of the last millennium, embedded systems were known as Y2K, the year 2K software flaw, they were located everywhere, including critical infrastructure like power and communications, transportation. And the world went nuts over Y2K. That's interesting because today we have far more embedded systems than we ever had back then. The Y2K flaw is fixed. Good news. Bad news is we have tens and tens and tens and tens and tens and tons of more embedded systems that if something like that happened again, it'd be very difficult to do. So embedded OSs are networked also. So for reasons of efficiency of economy, we connect embedded systems to a network, right? And so we get advantages from that, clearly. But any device added to the network increases the potential for a security problem. Important point that we've been discussing this entire course. So security testers should address those questions. Heart rate monitors and MRI machines. I'd already mentioned medical a little bit, Medtronics, but heart rate monitors and MRI machines run embedded systems, OSs, with a Windows OS, right? And it can't be patched. And there was an apparent confictor. Confictor is a famous worm that infected numerous systems around the world, including medical systems. Even in embedded systems that weren't connected directly to the internet, versions of confictor spread through this removable media. This worm was able to spread. And a simple media transfer with a USB drive might be risky because it might be the way that it is transferred. Now, embedded OSs are difficult to patch is one of the issues. With the general purpose desktop OSs, it's normal to wait for a vulnerability to be identified, to download and install the patch, and then restart your system. This approach does not work for many embedded OSs, however, because they continue to operate regardless of the threat, right? They're real time. They have to operate, particularly in critical systems like power distribution or air traffic control, or as we mentioned, medical life support. So embedded OSs are difficult to patch. And again, typically manufacturers prefer just to upgrade the whole system rather than the embedded OS. So they might not release updates even when vulnerabilities are discovered. Updating the embedded OS on some systems is difficult, so be prepared to explain the best course of action to your clients if this is an issue. Remember, the general purpose our embedded OSs are using open source software more times than not. And so partly it reduces the cost of development, but there's also the cost of having a patching system with this open source community, right? And so the risk of having potential vulnerabilities might or might not outweigh the benefits, right, as they're making business decisions. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We're going to come back to embedded OSs on networking devices in what I think will be the last part this week.